We missed the last week, and so we're here in Genesis chapter 11. And we were reading about, in that, of course, that's the Tower of Babel, or Babel, however you want to pronounce it. And this is in that time period where there were still, even after the flood, people are still not willing to live God's ways. They were still essentially profaning the name of the Lord. They were still wanting to do some things other than what He wanted them to. And that's the whole, intent and point of what they were coming to the tower to build. When it says, when they had traveled eastward, they found the valley, the plain, and the land of Shinar, and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them until they are hard. Let's build for ourselves a city, the tower that reaches into the heaven. And so let us make a name for ourselves, or else we will be scattered over the face of the whole land." Now, they were wanting to make a name for themselves, as opposed to who? As opposed to the Father. They were wanting to make a name for themselves for the express purpose of disobeying something that He had told them to do. Right? He had told them to multiply, to be fruitful, multiply, increase, and fill the whole earth. And instead of doing that, and when God is telling us to fill the whole earth, He is wanting us to take His name with us everywhere we go. To the nations, so to speak. That's a phrase that will come up later. But He wants us, everywhere we go, we want to take His name, His authority, His kingdom with us. But instead of doing that in His name, we would rather do things in our own, to make a name for ourselves, to essentially escape and get out of the cause that He has for us. And here's the thing. This is something that came up when Gabriel and I were at the HMA, the Hebraic Ministers Alliance meeting. And it just hit me in the course of our discussion there. When we try to dedicate, the cause of our life to something other than God's cause, what happens? Who's going to do something about that? He is. When we dedicate our lives to something other than His cause and His name and His kingdom, He will disrupt our plans. And I'm okay with that. Okay? He says, let us build this thing. And then verse 5, it says, Then Adonai, then the Lord, came down to see the city and the tower that the sons of man had built. And Adonai said, Look, the people are one, and all of them have the same language, so this is what they have begun to do. In other words, here I've given them this blessing of all being able to communicate with one another, all being able to share the same language, share essentially the same culture, more or less. And what are they doing with it? They're doing the opposite of what He wants them to do with it. And it's kind of like, if you ever seen it, and you see this with kids, you see this on the job, where somebody buys a tool or something else like that and brings it and says, "Here's what I want you to have so you can do your job." And instead, they go do some other stuff with it. And, we just heard about this at where I work. We've been given iPads and things like that to use, and there was a notice came around. There's been indications people have been downloading other applications and other things like that on the business computer, essentially. And, we can't do that. We're not supposed to do that. We're using it for something other than the job. You see kids, at the beginning of every school year, you give them school supplies or glue and pencils. And what do they often go out and do with those things? I remember getting my supply of pencils, and in my day we had pencil fights. Anybody remember those? No? Or you try to find the best pencils, and you try to break the other people's pencils with you use them like little battering ram type of things. Or glue, you end up putting the glue on everything other than your school assignments. Things like that. So we find ways to do other things than what they're intended. And when we are like that, it takes that time of correction. The Tower of Babel is this example of, if you're not going to do what I tell you to do, you're going to take the gifts that I give you for another purpose, then I am going to come and disrupt and cause this division so you don't accomplish your goal. And that's kind of a disturbing thought in some ways, to think that, man, if I'm not doing what He wants me to do, then I won't be as successful as I could be, no matter what it is.
That's that rebellious spirit.
You think? We don't have that, do we?
Oh, no. They say we're born with it.
But, there's Nebuchadnezzar and his golden statue is another example from Daniel chapter 3. Now, this is when he had given that vision of all the kingdoms. The head of gold, the chest of, was it silver, the waist and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron and feet of clay and all that kind of stuff. And instead, what does he do? He goes and builds a tower or a statue that is all gold. So what is he doing to the vision that God had given him of all these other kingdoms? I don't want those kingdoms to come about. I'm going to make this statue all about me. I'm going to make it my kingdom, and my kingdom is going to endure forever. I'm going to make everything the gold kingdom. And so it's a rejection of the vision that God had given him. He's trying to establish his kingdom forever, essentially. And how does that work out? Not so good. It still doesn't work out the way he wants it to, no matter how much money he put into building that gold statue. So on that side, when we try to dedicate the cause of our life to something other than God's cause, something that is ungodly, then He will come down and cause the division. He will come and cause things to be back in order the way they're supposed to be. Now, here's the flip side of that. When we try to dedicate the cause of our life to His cause, something that is godly, what happens? Does anybody come and try to disrupt that?
That's opposition.
Yeah. It still is going to meet opposition. It's still, the enemy is going to come and try to cause the division. He is going to try to end our dedication to His cause. You could say the unity of the body is an example of that. What is Yeshua's prayer? That they may be one. As you and I are one. That is a godly cause. And isn't that one of the things that the enemy tries to work so hard to prevent from happening? That's why he works so hard to disrupt our unity. Because if we were truly one, even back in the Tower of Babel, when they were not on a godly cause, He still, the Lord still comes down and looks at it and says, man, they have all these blessings I've given them. What can they not do? And they don't even have a godly cause. Imagine if the people of God come together in the unity that He provides, and we have the godly cause that He desires for us. Is there anything that is impossible? No. And so that's why the enemy is working so hard to disrupt that. Our love for one another, that's his cause. The world is supposed to know that we are His disciples by our love for one another and our unity together in the body. That's how the world is supposed to know those things. And so the accuser works to divide and destroy that love. And the problem is, it can be very hard to figure out which is which. Because the division and the scattering of the purpose is happening both ways, isn't it? The question is, who is the cause or who is doing the dividing? It might be hard for us to figure out which, because what do we always assume about the cause that we are pursuing? We always assume the cause is a good cause. We always assume our cause is a godly cause. Do you think if you had gone to these people in Babel and such and talked to them and say, do you think you're defying the Lord? A good number of them probably would have said, no, we're not trying to do anything like that. They would have justified their actions and their behavior, and they wouldn't necessarily know the difference. And because there's a lot of people, as Yeshua talks about it, there's a lot of people who say, well, didn't we cast out demons in your name? Didn't we do all these miracles in your name? Didn't we do all this other kind of stuff? And did he receive that? Was that really done in his name despite their intentions? No, it wasn't. And so that's the reality of our possibility. It can be very hard to figure out who is doing what because the result is often the same, and that's division leading to defeat. And we always assume our cause is godly, but the Father knows better. He sees through our intentions. He sees through our pride. And when the enemy sees movement in the direction of the kingdom, he is going to try to derail it with what you see among us now. All of the arguments and all of the minutiae and all the little things that get us bogged down. So that helps us ask the question, what is our cause? What is our purpose? What is the nature of our dedication? What are we dedicated to? Because we're all dedicated to something. I mean, that's the reality of it. We are all dedicated to something, either a godly cause or an ungodly cause. And here we are in the season of Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is all about what? Dedication. What are you dedicated to? What are you living for? When you think about it, this is what was hitting me and was thinking about this, is that Hanukkah in many ways is a picture of the redemption story. Because Hanukkah is not so much about dedication as it is about rededication, isn't it? Because the altar had already been dedicated once, then it had become defiled, and then it had to be redeemed and rededicated. When you think about it, we were dedicated to His cause from when? From the very beginning we were dedicated to His cause. There in the garden, there as Adam and Eve, they were dedicated to His cause, to work the ground, to work the garden and guard it. Right? That was their purpose. And some talk about it in terms of He was functioning essentially as a priest who was serving and worshiping and directing all of creation to worship Him. That was His purpose. And then what happened? There came a defilement, didn't there? The enemy came in and tried to disrupt us from living for that cause, to disrupt us and disqualify us from that dedication. And you think about it, the altar of our heart can only be dedicated to worship the one true Father. That's what we were dedicated for. And out of that we were defiled. It's as if we have allowed the enemy to sacrifice a pig on the altar of our heart, which is what the whole Kickstarter for the Hanukkah story was all about. And so because we have allowed the enemy to defile this altar, what needs to happen? It needs to be rededicated. We must be rededicated, and the cost of doing so is great. The altar must be sprinkled with a blood that is atoning. Look over in Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 11 says this, "But when the Messiah appeared as the great high priest, as the Kohen Gadol, of the good things that have now come," then he says, "passing through the greater and more perfect tabernacle or perfect tent, not made with hands, that is not to say of this creation. So he is passing through a tent or a tabernacle. Has this one ever been defiled? No. Yeshua is passing through this one, and it is one that has never gone and experienced what the one down here on earth has. In verse 12, he says, He entered into the holies once and for all, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by His own blood, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who have been defiled sanctify for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered Himself without blemish to God, to cleanse our conscience from dead works, to serve the living God. What's happening? Is He not purifying the altar? Essentially, He passes through the one that has never been defiled. He comes to the one that has been defiled and offers the sacrifice that is even better than anything we could offer in earthly speaking. Right? He offers His own blood, not the blood of bulls and goats, but the blood of Himself, the blood of Messiah. And then what does it do? At the end of verse 13, it cleanses our conscience from what kind of works? From dead works. From a purpose other than His name. From a purpose other than His kingdom. Because if we have that kind of purpose, He is going to thwart that kind of purpose. If that's what we're living for, He doesn't want us to succeed in that. I remember, political for just a moment, there's been talk here in the last year, and then there was talk 8 years ago about, do you want the president to succeed? Y'all remember all that? Some were talking about it with Obama. Some have talked about it now with Trump. There are people that didn't want Obama to succeed. They don't want Trump to succeed. They don't want their policies to succeed, right? Y'all remember that? And I can understand that. But to think that, our best, if we are living for ourselves, to make a name for ourselves, and for our kingdom and our purpose, to think that God is there, I don't want them to succeed at that. Does that mean He doesn't love us? Does that mean He doesn't want the best for us? No, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. Because He knows that what we are trying to do for ourselves is not really for our good. And so He cleanses our conscience from the dead works, the works that are really accomplishing nothing, the works that are not for our good, to do what? They cleanse our conscience from the dead works to serve the living God, to go back to the cause that we started out with. To go back to serving the living God for His name, for His kingdom, for His purpose. He wants us to get back to doing what we were created to do. In other words, that's what He is hoping that we will do. That we will get back to doing what we were supposed to do from the very beginning. Look over in chapter 10. Verse 10, he says, again, it's just reiterating what He has done in all of that. He says, let's back up a little bit. Verse 8, he says, after saying the above, sacrifices and offerings and whole burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not desire, nor did you delight in them, those which are offered according to Torah. Then He said, behold, I come to do your will. He takes away the first to establish the second, and by His will we have been made holy through the offering of the body of Messiah Yeshua once and for all. Okay, we have been made holy. We have been rededicated to His cause. The altar that is our life, our body, our heart, has been sprinkled with the atoning blood. And so we are rededicated. And the great thing about this dedication is, can it be undone? Can it be defiled at this point again? No. It has happened. It's made holy once and for all. It is a done and settled matter. Because the authority for it doesn't come from the blood of the bulls and the goats. The authority comes from the fact that it came down through the tabernacle, the tent, has never been defiled. He is serving at the altar of the one that has never been defiled and never going to be defiled. And so the offering that is made is ongoing, and it never needs to be offered again. See, Hanukkah is not just a picture of the rededication of the altar, from the Greeks and such back in the 160s BC. It's about us. Even from the calling of Abraham and the separating out of a people. Right? That's Genesis chapter 12, where he goes to Abraham. He says, I want you to leave your father's house, your country, and everything you know, and go to the land that I will show you. Okay? Stop living for yourself. Stop living for your name. Stop trying to do things other than what I want you to do, and go and live in the place that I show you, doing the things that I tell you to do. Okay? What was the goal of that? What is the goal of him calling out Abraham or Abram? Glorifying him, but it's separating out a people, so that people, through that people, he might bring the Messiah, and through the Messiah, he might be able to redeem. So even the calling of Abram from the very beginning is about getting people back onto the path of God, back to His purposes, so that we can be rededicated and redeemed. All of it is about the rededication of taking what has been defiled and making it pure again. That's even the call of Abram. Because the enemy has corrupted and defiled our altar, our purpose, and all of humanity. There's not a single person that has not been defiled. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Okay, the enemy has plunged the world into an increasing darkness. And Hanukkah and dedication is a reminder that the Father is doing something about it. He's not going to just let us stay in darkness. He's not going to let us continue to build our tower, making a name for ourselves. He is going to do something about it. And the thing is, we might not always like what He's going to do about it. This world is not going to like what He does about it. Is it? And a lot of it's going to reject what He does. But basically, Hanukkah is a reminder that the darkness and the defilement is not going to win the day. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? In other words, death has been swallowed up in victory. Okay? Hanukkah is just is a reminder that the darkness and defilement is not going to win the day. Essentially, the battle is not over. Because right now at least, whenever God sets up something to bring His light into the world, the enemy is also going to be there trying to disrupt it and tear it down. Right? Don't we still see that? Isn't that still operating in this world right now? The enemy is going to try to tear down the cause and the purpose of God. And when Daniel in chapter 9, in chapter 11, chapter 12 talks about the abomination that causes desolation, they understood that in the terms of Antiochus Epiphanes and how he came and sacrificed a pig on the altar and set up this altar to the foreign gods and stuff like that. They had seen, all of the Israelites, all the Jewish people thought they had seen the fulfillment of Daniel 9, 11, and 12 and its fulfillment with Antiochus Epiphanes. And then there was this rededication of getting it back onto the purpose and cause of God under the Maccabees. But when Yeshua talked about the abomination of desolation, did He talk about it in terms of a past event? Look over at Matthew 24. This is what must have been so confusing to those people that were living and listening to all this stuff. Matthew 24 verse 3 says, as he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" And so this is that answer that he gives. When will these things happen? And he speaks of events that sound a whole lot like Hanukkah. He says, "Be careful that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Messiah,' and will lead many astray." Okay, the enemy is going to come and try to divide and take people off in the wrong direction. "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must happen, but it is not yet the end. For nation will rise up against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places, but all these are only the beginning of the birth pains." This is where it really gets towards it. It says, "Then they will hand you over to persecution and will kill you." This is verse 9. And pay attention closely to, there are two kinds of things that are going on simultaneously. They will hand you over to persecution and they will kill you. You will be hated by all the nations because of my name, and then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and lead many astray, because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. This good news of the kingdom shall be proclaimed in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. And so when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through the Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. I'm going to stop right there. There are two things going on here. Okay, simultaneously, these things are going on. There is the purpose of God and His name and His kingdom, and then there's what's the other side of that coin? There's the purpose of the enemy and the kingdom of darkness. Those two things are coexisting in the end times. The actions of the faithful, those who have been rededicated, and the actions of the defiled, those who continue to be defiled. Those are the actions of the two kinds of people. Those who have been defiled, and that's all the way going back to Genesis 3, that kind of defilement, or those who have been redeemed and rededicated. There will be those who persecute, and then those who are persecuted. And what's the difference? Verse 9. What's the difference between those two groups? His name. His name. Not our own name. Not the kind of name that they were wanting to build at Babel. But you will be hated by all the nations because of my name. So it's our relationship to His name that is the difference between those who persecute and those who are persecuted. Okay? Then there will be those who fall away, who betray, who hate, who prophesy falsely, who lead and are being led astray. And the other, contrasting them, is the group that will do what? That endure to the end. And what's the difference between those two? You'll see that answer in verse 12. What's the difference? There are those who are, verse 12, there are those who are lawless, and those, that implies if they are lawless, then there is another group who do what? Who have the law, who are obedient, right? And the lawless, what's the word for, the Hebraic word for the law that they're using there? It's Torah. So it's because Torahlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold. Because they are more and more people are living without the authority, without the obedience to the Torah, those are the ones who are going to be falling away. Those are the ones who are going to be betraying and hating and giving false prophecy and leading astray. It's because they do not have the foundation of the Torah that is all possible. But if they are the Torah-less, then those who are obedient to the Torah are the ones in verse 13. They are the ones who are able to endure to the end and be saved. Because even Revelation talks about that. He talks about there are those who hold to the testimony of Yeshua and do what? They keep His commandments and hold to the testimony of Yeshua. Hey, come on in.
Hi. I always forget about this curve. I'm in the door.
That's all right.
Kathy's coming.
Yay. Yeah, long time. Welcome. Yeah, doing all right.
Sorry for the interruption.
That's all right.
We went to the Hanukkah party, so.
Oh, that's wonderful.
You couldn't pay me to eat a vodka right now.
Well, quick summary. We've been kind of combining the last couple of weeks of the Torah portion, of the 3-year Torah portion, and the concept of Hanukkah and dedication and such. And basically talking about how the story of Hanukkah is essentially the story of redemption. Because we were all dedicated to His cause in the garden, and then we became defiled. And there comes the work of the Messiah to come and redeem and rededicate us to His cause and His purpose. And at the moment, we're not far from being over, but we're in Matthew chapter 24 right now, and relating these passages about the end times, and how it fits and parallels many of the elements within the Hanukkah story. And we've been talking about in verse 9, there's two things that are going on simultaneously, starting in verse 9, and that is the actions of the faithful and the actions of the defiled. There's the defiled are the ones that are still the unsaved, essentially. Those that are still dealing with the curse of sin. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so their actions are there present in there. But then there are also the actions of the faithful, those who have been redeemed, those who have been rededicated by the covering of the altar and the blood of the Messiah being shed over us, that we might be able to return to living for His purposes. And so the things that we talked about already, there will be those who persecute and those who are persecuted. And the difference being, what we see in verse 9 is the relationship that we have to His name. So the persecutors and the persecuted, the difference is their walk with Him. There are those who will fall away, betray, hate, prophesy, falsely lead and be led astray, versus those who are enduring to the end. We see that in verse 10, 11, and then 12. With the major difference between those who endure to the end and those who are all those other descriptions is our relationship to the Torah. Are we lawless or Torah-less, or are we those that are obedient to the Torah? Okay? Because it's those who have the Torah and have the testimony of Yeshua, the name, those are the ones who endure. That's what Revelation talks about. And so as more and more people reject God's Torah, His ways, His law, and all that kind of stuff, the love of many will grow cold. So it's going to get darker and darker and darker. And it's going to make the light more and more and more necessary. It says this good news. I mean, he's talking about all this bad stuff happening. And then he says, this good news of the kingdom shall be proclaimed or in the whole world, in an ever increasingly dark world, as a testimony to all the nations. A testimony in what way? Bigger picture though. What is how does it testify to the nations? Or
That He's the only God.
Yeah.
I see verse 9 also could be speaking of Israel, in cruel to Israel.
Yeah, no, they're definitely included. Because, as Israel, they are hated because of their relationship to God. They're hated because they have the Torah.
And because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
And because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yeah, absolutely. Those believers in Yeshua, in Christ, are going to be hated more and more because they're going to be trying to live differently. So there's hatred for both of those. But as a testimony to the nations, what I'm getting at here is the testimony is a double-edged sword. Because as you testify and you give someone the gospel, as you share them the gospel of the kingdom and the salvation that is in Messiah, they have two options of response, don't they? They can accept or reject. If they accept it, then they themselves are redeemed and become, a part of the saved. If they reject it, that's also a response to the good news of the kingdom being proclaimed. Then their judgment is all the more solidified and validated. Okay? Hebrews talks about the Word of God being sharper than any double-edged sword. It has the power of life and death. This is blessing and this is cursing. Okay? If you accept it, then yay. But if you don't, then the judgment is validated. Okay, so it's still good news either way. It is still good news either way, but it's a testimony to all the nations, and it's to all those nations where the lawlessness has multiplied. It's to all of those nations where the Torahlessness has increased. That's where the testimony is supposed to go. And that's where it is going to. I've got two people like trying to say something.
No,
okay.
I was thinking, we were reading Genesis 11, and how He scattered them.
Yes.
Right before Genesis 11 is the table of nations.
Yes.
In chapter 10 of Genesis, and of course, in other words, this was the message for everyone God created, for all the nations. Everyone who is a descendant of Adam and Eve, everyone who is a descendant of God,
needs to be rededicated.
Yes, yes. And then you go back to those 70 nations, and of course we see those. You read Ezekiel, and Ezekiel in chapters 38 and 39 refers back to some of those nations.
Yes, it does.
So.
Well, here's the thing. So there's the two things going on simultaneously. Those who are the rededicated, and those who are the actions of those who are the defiled. And these are all going on simultaneously with this the end coming. So this good news, this fact, this opportunity, this account of that you no longer have to live for your name. You no longer have to live for your purposes. For this defiled state, that you can be changed. This altar does not have to be defiled forever. That's the good news. That it can be rededicated to His purposes. How many people have lost hope that, nothing will ever change? This world's just going to keep on going, and it's always going to be suffering. There's always going to be pain. And there's how many people have given up with, He can't save me. Right? I've done too much bad stuff. Well, this is the good news, is that there's nothing that you've done that cannot be redeemed and rededicated to His purpose. And so this is the good news that shall be proclaimed in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations. And then the end will come. Then he goes on, and I'm going to just read the one more verse. So when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. He's talking about that not in a past tense, which is how they would have understood it. They would have understood it in terms of Hanukkah and in terms of the defilement of the Greeks and such a couple centuries before. Yeshua is talking about it as something that is coming. And that would have confused them, because they would have been thinking, how is it possible? How is it possible that this could happen again? But if you think about this, the abomination of desolation, of all these things that have been going on simultaneously, the abomination of desolation is actually going to be welcomed by some people. And who are the kind of people that are going to welcome it?
Those who want a name for themselves.
Those who want to build a tower for the name for themselves, who want to live for their own kingdom and their own purposes, for the defiled. That's who actually are going to welcome the abomination of desolation. And so while all that is going on, the good news of the kingdom is still being proclaimed. And that's by who? Those who have been redeemed, those who have been rededicated, those who have His name and have the Torah. Those are the ones who are going to be speaking the good news of the kingdom. And so it comes back to what will our cause be? What will our cause be? What kind of people are we going to want to be? Are we going to want to be the people who have His name and His Torah? Or are we going to be like the ones that are like the Tower of Babel or Nebuchadnezzar's statue that try to build up our own name that the Father Himself is going to disrupt? Because all of this stuff is going to happen and the end will come, and who is going to be victorious? He is. There is no doubt about who is going to be victorious over all of this. We can live as the defiled, or we can live as the redeemed. Wouldn't we rather live for the cause of the kingdom, building up His name among the nations? Wouldn't we rather risk, I'd rather have Satan trying to stop me in my cause than have God try to stop me in my cause? Yeah, I'll take Satan trying to disrupt us any day over God trying to stop us. That's not what they talk about in Acts. If these men are not of God, then everything they do is going to fail. But if they are of God, then you might find yourself what? Fighting against and struggling against God. And He's like, guys, you don't want to be in that position. You don't want to be the one where God is opposing you. You would rather the enemy be our enemy. Because we also know that enemy is defeated already. And that's the good news. He has already been redeemed. So which kind of person do we want to be? The one who will welcome the defilement, or the one who will celebrate the rededication? Because many of those in the darkness and who are a part of the defilement, they actually think they are part of the light. Some of them think they're doing it on behalf of His name. They claim His name, but if they reject His Torah, then they'll eventually be deceived into following a false righteousness. And they'll say, didn't we do this in your name? Didn't we do miracles and heal people and cast out demons? And He's like, no, you didn't do it for me. You did it for yourself. So remember, you who were redeemed from your fruitless way of life have been redeemed by the precious blood of the Son of Man. And so the altar of our heart was sprinkled and covered and rededicated to the glory of its purpose, a place of worship unto the King of Kings. And so we are then allowed to reflect the glory of the one who is to come. We let our light shine in the darkness. And that's the stage that we're in. That's the time that we are in. The lawlessness is increasing in our day. Don't we see that? We see the love of many growing cold and getting colder. And yet, at the same time, the Father is calling people to His name and to His word. And in ways that we would never expect. As people that we would never expect. I would not have told you 10 years ago that I would be here doing this right now. You couldn't have I would have laughed you in your face if you had said, this is where you're going to be. And yet, and we all have a story like that to some degree. Kathy, would you have expected yourself to be here 10 years ago?
More likely, because at least I had the Jewish background.
Yeah.
More likely than you with
But
the Jewish background.
yeah. Still, you weren't on this track
No.
10 years ago.
No.